Are we ready, Vince? Should I clap? All right. All right, do you remember our rule? And that is your cue. Okay, that was a marginally successful first clap in. The rule is, for any of you who joined us late, when you see me or hear me and your fellow conveners today start to clap, join in. So let's just, that one was a little bit tepid, so we're just gonna try that one more time. Excellent, and that is your signal to return. So for our next session on local journalism, startups, and stations, let me welcome back to the podium Mr. Vince Stehle from the Media Impact Funders.
Thank you very much, Matt.
Take it away.
Thank you. And I love clapping before we've said anything. That's really very encouraging for a panel, don't you think? You're onto something here. So, yeah, exactly. So. When we thought about remaking public media, we thought about a couple of themes that were running through it for us, and that is, it's about traditional legacy broadcasters, the NPR, PBS stations, the radio stations, the television stations, who are familiar public media actors, who are transforming themselves, who are leading change in their fields, but also that public media is, there's a broader definition of public media, that important organizations like the Center for Public Integrity and ProPublica and many of the online news organizations that are beginning to sprout up all over the country, in Denver and other places, are also enlarging our sense of what is public media. And so we're thinking about public media in that broader definition and looking for innovation and change in both of those ways. And I think we have an excellent example of that kind of work, both from the public broadcaster, the traditional public radio standpoint, but also the news innovator, the online news innovator in the local environment here with us today. All day yesterday, with our journalism funders group, an idea would come up about, we want to explore more about that intersection and about where are we seeing that kind of innovation nested within the traditional legacy organizations. And I kept on saying, just stick around until tomorrow. We're going to have this conversation tomorrow, and this is where we're going to have that. We've got a great group here to discuss it with us. We have two Lauras. And Clark, are you going to go by Laura for this panel? Yeah. Laura Walker is the president of New York Public Radio, and she's been doing so much innovative work over many years, both in acquiring recently, just a few years back, the classical music station, WQXR, one of my favorite places on the dial, but also innovating in the news area. And just a couple of years ago now, 2 or 3 years ago, taking over several stations in New Jersey that went up. There was a number of stations, radio and television, that were made available all of a sudden. And Laura and her team decided to really do news in a serious way in New Jersey, and we're going to hear about that, I'm sure, too. she's dressed in white. It reminds me that someone once referred to Laura Walker as the great white shark of public radio. Always moving forward, always seeking that next opportunity, so watch out. Laura Frank is the, title escaped me there for a second.
I have many.
Many titles, this is part of it. Is the executive director of iNews and vice president for news at Rocky Mountain PBS. And I think in those two titles and whatever other titles you might have, it shows us that combination of the news innovation, the online news innovator, and also nested within the public broadcaster there in Denver. So we're going to hear those two perspectives, and then really one of the deans of media funding, of journalism funding in our field, Clark Bell, is running the journalism program at the McCormick Foundation, where I thought they recently crossed the impressive $100 million in grant-making mark, but he just assured me that it was 120 already, now just a year later. And so, it's a ton of great work that they're supporting at the McCormick Foundation over the last 20 years of that formal program. We're going to hear just a kind of an informal, short presentations from each of them, and then really want to move to a discussion amongst us and amongst all of you too. I should say a couple things. One is that we are a membership network, and we really appreciate that many of you are members, and we want to serve you in this conversation and in conversations throughout the year. You can go to mediaimpactfunders.org to find out about the programs like this, and particularly a heavy emphasis on our concern about assessing impact of media. Jessica Clark here in the front row is really our maven on impact, and she's publishing all of the reports that are relevant. If you have work that you want us to know about, tell us, tell Jessica, and we'll highlight them. And certainly we would encourage anyone who's not a member to join our network. We're evangelical about our work. We want to spread the word and have you in the room, whether you're in the whether you're a member or not, but we certainly encourage you to do that. And now I'm forgetting one thing that somebody just told me to do. Yes. Absolutely. I have a prop. This was supposed to remind me, but I didn't see it. So out on the front desk as you came in, you'll see a box like this. We're a membership network, but emphasizing the network part, we really want you to network with each other. And I think we published a registrants list that you may have received digitally beforehand. You might know somebody that you want to reach. If you haven't met them before and are having trouble locating them, write their name on the back of your business card, stick it in the box that looks like this out front, and we'll find you and them and put you together sometime during the day. We've got lots of open time for networking, so we want to help you do that. So we're going to start with the great white shark. Sorry, but thank you, Laura, for joining our discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Vince, and thank you, all of you in this room, both for your support of journalism and also for your partnership with us and many of us on the stage in kind of thinking about the future of journalism. I'm going to speak very briefly about New York Public Radio and our commitment to local news and what we've done in the last several years as we set out to really grow our impact in local news. As Vince said, we basically have three kind of lines of business. We have 8 radio stations in the New York metropolitan area, basically 6 news and talk and 2 classical music stations. We also produce a lot of programming, both local programming and national programming. National programming like Radio Lab on the Media, Studio 360, Freakonomics Radio. We do a lot of podcasting. And our third line of business is really digital. We are really innovating with some new digital products. We just launched a product called Discover, which is about personalized listening experience, basically created for New York City commuters. And we have a bunch of digital music channels as well. But about 3-4 years ago, we set out to fill what we saw was a real growing need in New York and New Jersey, which was to have more local news and to have, as others were leaving. We looked at the places like the Bergen Record, the Star Ledger in New Jersey that were laying off lots of reporters. Even the New York Times, which was, as it was growing its national and international focus, was decreasing its commitment to local news. And so we set out to say, what can we do about this? And we wanted to see how we could build our news effort so we could fill that need and reach more diverse listeners in our listening area. We knew we wanted to focus on enterprise reporting, narrative story, and around beats, and also around New Jersey. We saw that need in particular in New Jersey. And we knew we wanted to, at the same time as we were building this, change kind of the way we were approaching news gathering, so that instead of it being kind of radio stories and then digital kind of mirrors of those radio stories, we were really integrating our radio and digital reporting and adding some other elements, including data news and crowdsourcing. So we set out to create a plan. The Revson Foundation was one of the early funders that funded us with a $1 million 3-year grant to really make a big leap. We also were able to, and I thank many of you in this room for your support, from Wincote, from Dodge, from Knight Foundation, on education from Gates, and CPB as well, and many others who have supported this effort. So we really had about 4 different approaches to this. One was we hired talent. And about a year into this project, which was about 2 years ago, we hired Jim Schachter, who was the managing editor at the New York Times, had been there for 17 years, came in really to up the game and to, with a love for radio, but frankly not really a lot of experience in radio, but a great deal of experience in journalism. We also hired New Jersey reporters. I think we have 5 now. That are focusing on New Jersey, and beat reporters in education and transportation. And we also created a data journalism team. So we have, I think, 5 or 6 people now who are really focused on data journalism. As Vince said, we acquired 4 stations in New Jersey. And between WNYC and those 4 stations, we reach 75% of the population of New Jersey. And our partner, WHYY, reaches the other 25%. So we actually reach more of the percentage of population of New Jersey than we do New York. The third and very, very important part of this is we knew we could not do this alone. So as we built up our own talent, we also developed partnerships and real approaches to partnerships. Many of them worked, some of them didn't work so well. We came up with some real principles of partnership, but we have some fabulous partnerships with places like New Jersey Spotlight, WHYY, with AIR and Locavore, which great project, with a recent one with NBC TV here in New York, obviously with NPR, with the Bergen Record and the Star Ledger. And these are really joint reporting projects often, as well as sometimes just sharing information. And then the fourth kind of approach that, in addition to kind of the data journalism and looking at crowdsourcing, we looked at what we could do as a radio station and started approaching our reporting so that it wasn't just about putting a piece, say, in Morning Edition or All Things Considered. It was about creating a conversation throughout the day. So it was, and over time, so that we would use our air in every way possible. So it was deep reports, enterprise journalism, the websites, convening conversations on our local talk show, Brian Lehrer, doing promos for things, and then also keeping with stories. So I will just end with 4 very brief examples of kind of what we've done in the last several years, beginning with one that I think really helped both set the bar and gave us the confidence that we could do more, which was several years ago. Elsa Chang, who's now a wonderful reporter at NPR, but she was with us at the time, really broke a lot of the news about stop and frisk in New York, the stop and frisk practices. And it was something where she also worked together with the data news team. So she was doing her reporting. She was looking at what was happening, the huge increase in the number of stop and frisk accounts in New York. And the data news team was layering data of the precincts, the stop and frisk reports, the arrests, finding there wasn't a whole lot of kind of correlation between where they were doing the stop and frisk stops and the arrests, actually. And really dug in and created a series of stories that set the conversation that ended up being something that became a huge topic, as many of you know, in New York in the mayoral campaign. And that was a story that we started several years ago and continued on. The second one, of course, Sandy, where we started as a radio station. People didn't have electricity. We were there to serve. We were also there with data mapping that was looking both in New York and New Jersey about flood levels, that was looking at the subways. We then did enterprise reporting. We didn't stop there after the 4 days of the Sandy thing. We kept going, and we were keeping on reporting about the federal aid, about, for instance, we did something, I think it was with the Bergen Record, where we looked at the difference between New York and New Jersey transit in their emergency preparedness, and we're going to keep looking at that. Just last week, we did a story on the 911 system in New York, where we looked at many of the problems and the long time delay between when people are calling, and particularly when there's a fire, how that particular connection isn't being made. And just this week, that's something that de Blasio has announced he's going to do a greater investigation of. So, and then finally, and I'll end with this and a little bit of tape, because I didn't bring slides, I brought tape. We were doing a lot of work in the health area, and we have been looking in the last several months at sleep, something that everyone cares about. And so we've done reporting on some of the new research around sleep. We've convened groups. We've had 5,200 listeners tracking their own sleep through our sleep app and through devices that they link up. We've had teams kind of trying to improve their own sleep. We had 3 teams: the digital detox team, where you stop using your digital devices at least an hour before bed. That's the way to get more sleep. Anyway, I will play that and then just make one closing comment.
I sleep so badly. I sleep like a new parent sleeps, except for instead of having kids, I just have my own caffeine addiction and love of bringing my own computer into bed.
You have people that check their phones all night long to make sure they didn't get a critical message from work, or worse, kids getting texts in the middle of the night. Every time you get that hit of light, it's like taking a sip of espresso.
It used to be that young people would have sleepovers on the weekends, and of course, they wouldn't really sleep. They'd stay up all night talking. But now it's like unlimited sleepovers, 7 days a week in our own bedrooms.
I'll wake up in the middle of the night around 3, and I'll go on Instagram or Facebook, and I'll just see double tap if you're up, or like my status if you're up.
If you have trouble sleeping, what keeps you up at night? And what, if anything, brings on the Z's as we begin our family meeting on sleep?
Getting out of bed and sitting somewhere else in dimly lit room and doing something to pass the time, like reading a magazine, that is better than laying in bed, because laying in bed just continues to teach yourself the bed's a place to worry and to lay awake.
You have to work with your own body, figure out what is going to relax you, and if it's tracking your sleep, looking at your last night's sleep when you only got 4 hours, don't do that.
I don't leave my cell phone charging in my bedroom, number one. So I've self-imposed a no phone space for a period of time that I need to sleep.
When we take care of ourselves, to sleep enough, meditate, move, whatever it is that recharges us, we are going to be more effective at everything we're doing. These are truly performance enhancement tools.
Boys probably have more violent dreams than girls. Girls probably have more nice ballerina dreams.
And now, after fierce competition, we can reveal a winner. Which rival group of you is able to increase your average sleep time the most? And the winner is, drum roll please, Digital Detox.
Digital Detoxers, I know you're out there. We've been talking a lot on Twitter and on Facebook. It is hard, but you can do it.
So we're now, Arianna Huffington, me, and 2 other CEOs in New York are doing projects within our own organizations about sleep. But just very briefly, lastly, we do measure our impact, because this is about impact as well. And we do that both qualitatively, about looking at the quality of kind of what we're doing, clearly and we also, Revson commissioned a study that Brooke Kroger wrote for us, which was a very long, very detailed study about partnerships, about how we grew the newsroom, and anyone who wants it, I think, can get it through Media Impact Funders. And then also, obviously, looking at how we can sustain this. Are we sustaining this through membership and sponsorship and continued funding?
Great. So much to think about and to talk about in a few minutes. Get some questions, think about some questions, but before that, we're going to hear from Laura Frank, and I think at least the other side of one coin of collaboration. So.
Well, we started out a few years ago. I had been an investigative reporter at the Rocky Mountain News. I don't know if all of you remember the story of what happened to that paper, closed in 2009. I was an investigative reporter. My background is in what Laura called data journalism. Is that what? We used to call it computer-assisted reporting, which now sounds like telephone-assisted reporting. Of course you use a computer. But investigative reporting. And when the Rocky closed, there was a great need in Colorado to try to figure out how are we going to keep doing those stories that are complex and need data analysis, and other newsrooms, even though they still exist, were half the size they've been and couldn't do those stories anymore. So I created something called iNews. It was one of these online only. It started out with doing that kind of reporting, but what was different was, instead of trying to attract people to that website, we were pushing content out through other news organizations. So we worked with Rocky Mountain PBS and every daily newspaper and public radio and some ethnic and emerging media throughout Colorado. And we really started having impact. So we're here at the Impact Funders. We want to talk a little bit about impact. I'm going to give you some examples of the impact. But what makes this interesting and relevant to the public media discussion was that last year, Rocky Mountain Public Broadcasting CEO Doug Price came to me and said, look, we've seen the impact that this public service journalism has had. We think public media should be doing public service journalism. Let's merge. And so we did. And it's been a wonderful year, a little more than a year now, of seeing how you take the trust and respect of a public media outlet and combine that with the impact of investigative reporting. And it's been quite exciting for us. We tend to do big projects that are across mediums. So when we do a story, we do a text version that goes on websites and newspapers, an audio version for radio and websites, a video version for television and websites, and then some digital only, interactive graphics, searchable databases. This story called Losing Ground looked at growing disparity for the largest minority groups in Colorado and some of the most important measures of social progress. And I have to say, I spent several decades as an investigative reporter, and I have never seen the reaction that a community had to something like this. And I believe it's because we did something a little bit different that we were able to do because of this merger of two organizations. We created a community engagement kit. And it was actually, when you unfolded it, a 3-foot poster that was a giant infographic that highlighted the findings of this. And we mailed it to every elected official in the state, every business leader, every nonprofit and foundation got it in the mail. And inside was a kit that if you wanted to have your own conversation about these findings, you could. And people took this and ran with it. Just one example, there's something called the Colorado Black Roundtable, made up of people from around the state, leaders who are looking at big issues. They decided to completely clear their docket for the summer and do an education focus on losing ground. They planted yard signs. They robocalled 40,000 people. They held a summit in the fall where 500 people came, including every Black elected official in the state. And not to just rehash what the story found, but to say, okay, we can stop arguing about what's true and what's not, and we can start doing something about it. legislation has been introduced. The mayor is thinking about appointing a losing ground czar. There are ongoing meetings and after-school programs have been developed. All kinds of things have happened because of this. So this is the kind of journalism that we are focused on. Just a couple more quick examples. We discovered there's an epidemic of hit and run accidents in Colorado. And after we were able to report on that and share it with all our media partners, the governor signed a new law that helps go after hit and run drivers that weren't being prosecuted. We looked at, have you heard of these K through 12 online cyber schools? We looked at how they were really failing students. Half of them were washing out, and yet they were keeping the tax dollars, which made it hard for the brick and mortar schools that the kids had to go back to educate them because there was no money for that to happen. After we did that, the state education department tightened the regulations on those cyber schools. You've heard some about the Dollars for Docs project. We analyzed that data. In Colorado, they're by law supposed to report when they get paid by a pharmaceutical company. Many doctors weren't doing that. After we reported that, many more started following the law. And sometimes the law changes. How many of you knew Tom Cruise is actually a farmer in Colorado? There's a tax break that you can get. It's meant for farmers and ranchers, but we found that it was actually going to movie stars and mostly developers. After we reported that, the law changed to close that loophole. That other picture is of some e-waste. We found e-waste was being illegally exported, dumped when they thought it was being recycled, and also dipped in acid and burned in people's backyards, like you may have seen pictures of in developing nations, these burned villages. Well, it was happening in the backyards of Colorado, and the regulators insisted to us that this was not happening when we went to talk to them about it, but we had video so we could show them that it was indeed happening. And after that, the law was changed to make it more clear what you could and couldn't do. By the way, we found, investigative reporters love these little hooks. We found that the very state agency responsible for overseeing e-waste in Colorado was sending its own trash computers to government surplus auctions where they wound up being illegally exported, dumped, and dipped and burned. So that is no longer happening. And I just want to make the point that none of this impact would happen if it weren't for people like you and viewers like you. All of this really got its start with what you might think of as seed money from the Knight Foundation, Ethics and Excellence, and then some local foundations that you can see there. And that is what we are really focused on, taking that as seed money and then making it. I'm taking down furious notes from the last panel about the revenue opportunities that exist. Maybe you were too, Bill. I see you over there shaking your head. So this keeps going, but this is the impact. We now have, I'm on the board of the Investigative News Network, which is an umbrella group for nonprofit investigative news organizations. There are more than 100 of them across the country now, and there are different levels of collaboration with public media. iNews was actually the first to merge with a public media company in the country, but there have been others since. It's happened in St. Louis. I believe they're looking at it in Florida and New Orleans. So it's really full of opportunity for different levels of collaboration, sometimes short of marriage, which is what we had, although it's a very happy marriage, I must say, but lots of opportunity out there. So I'll look forward to talking more about it with you.
Wonderful. And so great to have those really tangible, practical examples of impact. Sometimes I think we get tied up in more perhaps arcane ways of sort of gauging impact and understanding it, but it's really important to also have the stories and the really tangible examples to focus on as well. So Clark, tell us, the perspective of a media grant maker, what should we learn from this, and what are some of your examples of your work?
Well, first, Vince, thanks for the kind words and introduction and the ability and opportunity to sit next to two of the best projects, I think, in public media, local news, not-for-profit. They're really taking community and state and even multi-state approaches to making life better, a better democracy, more civic engagement, and that's what it's all about. Now, at McCormick, support for local journalism is a big part of our DNA. Our history of going back and working with not-for-profits goes to the Chicago Reporter since the 1990s. Chicago Reporter covers issues of race and poverty, and there's no great business case you can build for that kind of coverage. Yet foundations like ours have supported this publication, and it's doing better work than ever because it paid attention to the funders' requests for increasing your distribution, making your work more focused, looking at evaluation and connecting with the community. So I think funders are good at kind of prodding and helping these kind of organizations succeed. And I look around the room, and we've done projects with Bill and Geneva Overholser, she was at USC, Paul Sparrow, many of you in the room, but it is part of our DNA. I would say that the work we do in not-for-profit news gathering dovetails nicely with the other two priority areas of funding for McCormick. One is news literacy, which is really audience development. We call it Why News Matters. And then the second is journalistic rights, and that's all about press freedoms, access to information, and probably more important, public sector accountability. In the end, it's about citizens engaging and becoming more of a part of a vibrant democracy. Now, back in 2012, we commissioned JLab, Jan Schaefer, who many of you know, and Aaron Palgren, did a deep dive in Chicago of all the news organizations that we were able to query, and these were local news, most of them startups. And we were able to reach 278 news organizations, digital first, we called them. And basically, 9 out of 10 were dealing with some combination of critical challenges to staffing, strategy, survival, and impact measurement. It was all in various levels, but everybody's dealing with this, mainly because most of the groups are started by journalists who aren't used to having these types of skills and having to work under that kind of strategic umbrella. That helped us understand that there were opportunities beyond direct grant making, that we did staff trainings. We brought in IRE to work with WBEZ's newsroom. We've done work with the Better Government Association, Reporters Without Borders, our Chicago Headline Club, and working with the not-for-profit news organizations, the startups, as well as the bigger news operations in town like WBEZ. Now, we mentioned yesterday's meeting, and some of you were here yesterday, and we did talk a lot about the First Amendment and protecting sources in this era of unprecedented surveillance. And we looked at tensions and opportunities of foundations working in the not-for-profit news area, how we encourage collaborations, how we can jumpstart organizations. I think that projects based around the upcoming election was something that 2014 and more important, the 2016 elections, that seemed to draw a lot of interest from the funders in the room yesterday. But why do we look to partnering with organizations like public media or really advanced, enhanced startups like Laura's? I think it really has to do with the innovation. They're willing to take chances. It's the dedication of the staff. It's the commitment to the democracy and to the community. And it's really often the leadership. And that's really sometimes the deciding factor. And that makes public media a willing and able partner. We also have talked about the role of universities and educators in this scenario. We have started a program this year with the Medill School of Journalism at Northwestern called the Social Justice News Nexus, where we have taken 14 community journalists, 2 of them from WBEZ, a couple from the Reporter, and then many other just bloggers, citizen activists, community small newspapers that have survived, and we give them 2 things. First of all, use of the Medill faculty to do multimedia training and skills and storytelling, and probably more important to them is the use of either 1 or 2 graduate students to help them with the research. What we've decided to do is take one topic every 4 or 5 months, have everybody work on that topic in their own way, their own style, their own medium, and then break the stories at about the same time. Well, that actually is going to happen starting today on WBEZ. And the topic is it's basically a cost-benefit analysis of drug sentencing, including treatment areas, impacts on a single block, pipelines to South America and how how drugs get into the communities, impact on schools, the pipeline to prison, all these activities, but allowing each of these groups to work with the Medill folks. We just think this has a lot of potential. We'll repeat it with another topic later this year and just keep going and hopefully build then what we're calling a community news nexus and get people talking, working together and collaborating. Now, yesterday we talked about really what kind of restrictions or what kind of guidelines or what types of rules of engagement should we play by when foundations are working with, investing in not-for-profit news or working with public media. Our motto at McCormick is, we're more than about the funding dollars. Our motto is we put together good people with good people. And that's really how I think many of us at McCormick spend our time. Many of you know Mark Halleter's been with us for years, and then we recently hired Jennifer Choi, who was a community relations person at WBEZ, but was also a former teacher. So we've got a pretty good balance. So I guess we start asking, is there not only a need for whatever collaboration is being suggested or proposal being funded, but is there demand for it? Because there's, I think Eric Newton used the word yesterday, supporting big old churches in major cities where nobody seems to go. They all look pretty and there's a reason to restore them, so there's the need, but is there a demand? You don't see them filled too often. We need to know who's going to lead the project and who's going to coordinate it, because in every relationship, somebody has control, and I don't care if it's 50.1 to 49.9, there is a driver. And people say we're equal partners. It usually doesn't work that way. I think funders should expect that to understand the role of each of the participants, whether it has to do with content, technology, distribution, but clearly delineated. I think making periodic progress reports should be important to all of the funders. I think that having midstream corrections. People are afraid to admit failure sometimes, admit that they're not reaching the benchmarks. And I think that also having a graceful exit strategy should be part of the mix. So I guess my last thing I'd like to talk about is the things that funders, that at least at McCormick, we want to know, and many of those who are traditional journalism funders. Number one issue, and came up time and time yesterday, is sustainability. That's easy for you to say. Sustainability of the project. That's, often that's the end, but really shouldn't that be the beginning of the dialogue? Two, it's the impact. So we've got the sustainability and the impact. Third is measuring. Fourth is the professionalism involved. We've had some collaborations where people think outside the box. The problem is they don't realize there is a box. I think the learning is important for all the partners to be sharing information all along the way. And then finally, engagement with the audience and the community. So you add that up and it's simple, just like Bill Clinton used to say. It's about the economy, just keep it simple. So I think going forward that McCormick and other foundations are going to be taking a much more aggressive stand on evaluation strategy. Most of you are funders in the room. I'm not going to give you the lectures about collective impact because you probably know more about it than I do. But we're looking at grantees, clusters, and initiatives and trying to build insight into our collective wisdom and the collective impact on the field. So I think that in the end, we're looking for innovation, righteously important interventions. We want interpretation so that there's corrections in midstream, and finally impact. And I hope you'll join us on this journey.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Clark. Great summary. A great summary of your own work, but also thank you very much for bringing forward all of the important topics we discussed yesterday around the table. This room is such a great room. It was a completely different experience. One very large table around which we all sat, about half as large a group, and we as a group, talked throughout the whole day. So we know that twice as many of you will have at least as much to say. So, think about some questions. I'll just start with one, pulling from what Clark was alluding to in our discussion yesterday, the very important question about managing interests, right? If we're, as funders, we're supporting the work of journalism in particular at your institutions, I want to ask the two Lauras to talk to us about how they manage those interests and understand that we may have a point of view as funders, we may have objectives, and how do you manage the money, the impact discussion, and maintaining the editorial independence and integrity that is so important to you and to us, because if we support you and damage your integrity in the process, it's no good for us either.
I guess I would say we start. Is that on? Yeah.
Now you're on.
We start with two principles. One is editorial control lies with us. And two, we have a lot to learn from our partners, including our funders. And that we have learned over the course of many years of working with various different funders. I think our newsroom, I think of the example for me was a few years ago when we got some money from Rockefeller for transportation. And we had some concern that they had kind of an advocacy position, and we didn't want to, we obviously couldn't take on their position. Our reporter at first was very wary of talking to the folks at Rockefeller, but over time, as we worked through kind of, this is what we're going to cover and we're going to have editorial control, and we started with, we want to learn from you what we think the issues are. And that relationship over time became, between the reporters and the people at Rockefeller, Nick Turner it was so strong that he became one of her greatest sources. Always understanding on their side and respecting kind of the editorial control. And for us, that was a big change, because where, frankly, the newsroom folks also then could see that funders could be partners in that way. I think the other thing is that truly it is the dialogue with funders, many of you in this room, Wincoat, Knight, others that have Dodge, that have made us better, and by asking what's the impact, what's the sustainability, it's made us go back on the business side and kind of say, okay, we're going to increase membership in New Jersey, and we're going to create a major donor program in New Jersey to help sustain this. And also, we're not going to ever get to total sustainability. We'll still need some foundation dollars.
Okay. And I might just interject before we hear from our other Laura. We heard from Zia Khan, a VP for strategy at Rockefeller last year at this event, which we hosted at the Ford Foundation. And he had a very interesting perspective where he said that their support for journalism was really part of their investigation and understanding the world, not so much about driving a public relations objective to get their story out, but as part of their learning process. Investing in the ability of great learners to find facts and illuminate the world.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because, and that's true.
A different perspective than we often hear from funders.
I think that's not uncommon, though. I would echo what Laura said, and I can give you a quick example of that. With the Losing Ground, part of that package was a half-hour documentary, and one of the funders for that was the Women's Foundation in Colorado. And what they learned from the journalism, they were then able to take, and they actually used that documentary in public meetings that they held, forums around the state afterwards. So the learning goes both ways when you have people working together. I think going back to your question about, you're really asking about firewalls and how do you protect the integrity. One of the things that I think is very helpful for us is that we really decide first, this is a big issue, the public is needs to know about this, and so we are not being driven by, no one can ever accuse us of being driven by the interests of someone outside the newsroom. And it tends to be, because our journalism focuses on these big issues, there's a lot of overlap and interest with funders because they're focused on those big and important issues too. So it
Yeah,
tends to be a
I
symbiotic
agree that integrity is the bedrock of any of these relationships. I think Kathy M. from MacArthur yesterday brought up the idea, well, if you want to avoid some of this, one way is to do general ops support. We're getting away from gen ops. McCormick is as guilty as anything. Everything is project focused for a topic, for a particular program. And I think that many of us in this room need to reconsider the benefits of doing gen op funding. I'm sure you'd like to.
I'd love that.
and I would too. And one of the benefits is what you just described.
Right, for sure. So maybe we can also carry some of those messages back to our peers in the funding world. Surely you have some questions. We have microphones on either side of the room, and we have a question right up front. So Lynn will get that one. Thank you, Lynn.
I'm Valentine Cass from the National Science Foundation, and I want to thank you all for the good work that you're doing. And I have a specific question for Laura, this Laura. And I was really interested in your community engagement kit. Can you just describe what that was? And
I actually brought one. This was smaller. It's better for traveling. It's for the other one was a 3-foot poster, but this one fit in a regular envelope and is cheaper to mail too. And we have a letter that just describes what the project was and some of the major findings. Then we have a brochure that can fit in your pocket or your purse. You open it up, and this project was about mental health, untreated mental health problems. Colorado has been the poster child in some ways for some pretty serious and terrible things related to mental health, as you're all aware. So it goes through just very briefly talking about some of the major findings. For example, you're in Colorado 5 times as likely to wind up behind bars as you are in a psychiatric bed if you have a mental illness, and all of the ramifications of that. You open it up, and it's a big infographic about the money, the costs. Every Coloradan, it costs about $1,000 a year, the cost of mental health. And then at the bottom, there are resources. If you need help, if someone you know needs help, there are different places to go so that you have this. In addition to that, we did, I don't know if you can see this. This is the size of a business card to fit in your wallet. It's a mental health first aid kit. So if you are encountering someone with a mental health crisis, it gives you tips on what to do. I don't know if this ever happens to you, but it happens to me a lot, and maybe it's because people come to reporters when they feel something is wrong. Several times I've wished I'd had something like this in the newsroom. At any rate,
Can you give one to Lynn? She's going to need that.
Yes, you're going to need it later. It gives you tips, and of course, it gives you the statewide phone number to call for the help crisis line, and we handed this out at Rockies baseball games. At one of our partners is the 9 News commercials, the big commercial station in Denver. They handed it out at their shred-a-thon, where you bring your old records and get them shredded. They are being handed out at mental health meetings that we're helping to lead across the state. So again, these are going everywhere. And part of the idea is that you can then take this and have your own conversation about it. You don't need the media outlet to continue the conversation. You can take it and continue to have it on your own, and that's where we're seeing the real reaction and impact come through.
So we have another question up front here. Matt, if you can.
David Haas, Wyncote Foundation. You know, we struggle a lot with sustainability with startups and digital news, but it's, you know, we're evangelical, we're hoping that'll be figured out. Then the partnership with the public media institution is a terrific one. We often don't think, though, about the struggle of the public media institution doing good journalism, per se, or if that's the right thing to do or how. So I don't know, maybe Clark, is there, because I think if we care about this, public media is crucial to it, but in some cases, when is it an external partnership? To what degree? Are there learnings about trying to generate more journalism capacity within stations that we can learn from? My perception is it's all great, but I'm wondering if there's something to learn about that if we want to support our public media institution to do more journalism, combined with others.
First of all, the WBEZ in Chicago is so good about working with other grantees that we have. That's first and foremost. Second, we have done some direct funding for their Vocalo program and Curious City and some of the other stuff. Their news operation, it's been mostly in the way of training. We haven't added staffers, but that's certainly, we're looking to do possibly some state house work for BZ. I'm going to make my role in the next 2 years is trying to work with community foundations and family foundations so that they understand the importance and the integrity and the influence of the public media and digital news startups. And if they want to make a better education system, a better government system, a better community, that they should look to journalism and media as part of the solution. So I personally am going to take that crusade on. I've done it worked a little bit in Indianapolis and Minneapolis and throughout Illinois, trying to get them involved in our news literacy project. But I think that this is something that's essential.
So I want to just take the liberty of putting someone on the spot in the audience. Bruce Theriault, right here with a microphone, because I think, we could just say, be like Laura or be like Laura, and that would be great. But obviously, we've gotten, high performers here up here, and it's not as good everywhere. I just wonder if you could share with us, Bruce, from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, what's it like out there? Are there bright spots? Where is there great need for more Lauras?
Well, yes, well, first off, as you can see, leadership matters and vision matters. And so what we're seeing out there is a lot of encouraging things. But we're dealing with the same kinds of issues that everybody else is dealing with, which is, do you have the scale to do the work that you're going to do now? We fund 410 radio stations and 170 television stations. And I can tell you not all of them have or very few of them actually have the scale that WNYC has, or Rocky Mountain PBS now. And so we're concerned about that. And so we've been really urging more collaborative models and through a whole series of projects to fund, in the end, journalism, good journalism, but to increase the impact at the local level or across the region. And so we're having some success in that. And I was very curious, since I have the mic, I'll ask you a question. I think you said something about sustainability, Clark, as about this shouldn't be the first thing you talk about?
I think it should be the first thing you talk about.
Oh, you do?
That's,
okay.
Yeah.
I hear that all the time, and my feeling is that sustainability follows value, not the other way around. That everybody wants to create a sustainability plan before they've created value for the partners and value for the audience. Mm-hmm. And when you create value for the partners and value for the audience, people will struggle with the financial end. And so I think some of our money has to be risk money. At CPB, we're very risk averse because it's, in the end, public money. But foundations maybe have a little bit more flexibility than we do for that. But I've always believed that. And so I think we shouldn't ignore it, and we should be demanding, something that isn't going to be a one-off. Because I think we're trying to build ongoing effort across the country and to inform citizens on the ground in all these communities and fulfill those information needs that communities have.
I guess I would just say that we hope to exclusively invest in projects and people who will already have value bringing, have credibility and be able to bring value to the table. So we're not looking, when we're talking about innovation, we're not talking about gross experimentation. We think the people we invest in already bring value to the table.
But I think good principles for sure to keep in mind about what follows what. And I would just maybe suggest that you're being a little modest. As an institution, I think the Corporation for Public Broadcasting has been a real leader, investing first in innovative practices with the Public Radio Exchange and Public Radio Capital, which is now the Public Media Company. And you've just announced and is reported in, I think, the current issue of Current, which is available on the side tables, a $750,000 grant, I believe, for a new video platform that is going to be amplifying new work in more popular and AAA radio stations, the popular music of the day. And I'm going to take the liberty of switching gears here. You're with us now and in the breaks, and for more conversation about news and journalism, have at it during the breaks. But we want to also acknowledge that additional value at the local level comes in public radio that focuses on the local music scene and maybe reaches a different demographic than what the traditional news and information and classical stations have been delivering. And we're very fortunate to have with us Mike Henry from Paragon Media Strategies, who has been a real leader in AAA radio, which is, I think we all agree, not a great name for the format. I think increasingly it's known as music discovery, where in an increasingly consolidated corporate media environment, which is focusing on an ever smaller playlist, those AAA radio stations are the place for music discovery. And I'm not going to steal any more of your lines. Mike Henry, come and join us here. We're going to stay on the stage and hear a short presentation about what's happening in that important field.
Thanks, Vince. It's great to be here. You'll get a short presentation out of me by putting me ahead of lunch, so we'll go fast. I feel like everybody else from my family should be here. My mother was the first Head Start teacher in the state of Florida in the 1960s. My father started the migrant education program in the state of Florida. And my wife is the president of an educational foundation in Colorado called Bootstraps, which gives money to kids that can't go to college. So I have a journalism degree, but that pales to the real impact that you folks and the folks in this room and other people in my family are actually doing. So I'm a radio consultant. I started in 1979 in Athens, Georgia. And so I got to discover, music discovery very naturally by having REM bring up reel-to-reels, and we'd listen to them, decide which songs we liked, we'd put them on the radio, and that's how that band started. And that's how a lot of my career started. And 35 years later, fast forward, and I'm consulting most, if not all, the music discovery stations in America. I've launched a lot of them, including The Current in Minneapolis, and we're going to talk about that now. And you might be saying, what does this have to do with what we're talking about here? But I'm a big believer that you get to the left brain through the right brain. You get to the point of logic through entertainment, and that's what we try to do. The other things I just wanted to mention real quick was Music X, which Vince already mentioned. It's on the cover there of The Current back there, the collaboration he talked about. I also consult a radio program called E-Town, which they like to refer to themselves as the original band of hippies that started talking about climate change in 1971, and 23 years later they're still doing a weekly radio show using music to promote sustainability of the planet. So I'm a big believer in everything you guys are doing, and let's move it over and have some fun. Make this quick and get through it. So if we could look at the first slide, I just want to say radio's still alive. One of my favorite lines is, radio is the cockroach of all media. You just can't kill it as much as everybody tries.
Right.
And there you go. Here we are today in 2014, and 48% of everyone in the country still leans on radio most for music discovery, and that includes 56% of teenagers. And so next I want to sort of show you through a video what music discovery is. This is from a radio station, a local music station in St. Louis, Missouri, and they were raising money for their capital campaign to build a new building, and this was their promotional video on Kickstarter. It raised $58,000 in like 2 weeks.
Great station.
Yeah, at KDHX in St. Louis, Missouri, we're a commercial-free community radio station. For the people, by the people. Did you know the internet radio sites use computerized algorithms to play your music? Wow, that's pretty neat. But have these computerized algorithms ever drank whiskey with Miles Davis, been hit with a bottle at a Guns N' Roses riot, duck walked with Chuck Berry, or sold their car to buy a rare Sex Pistols record? Of course not. But the DJs at 88.1 KDHX have. That's because at KDHX we're real people who live for real music. It's the way great radio is supposed to be, so it doesn't matter what you're into. KDHX has something for everyone, with listeners everywhere, all over the globe who stream us live on kdhx.org. For 25 years, we've been an institution in St. Louis. Now that we're getting bigger and better, we've outgrown our little old space on Magnolia Avenue. So we're building an independent media center in the heart of St. Louis's Grand Center Arts and Entertainment District. In addition to new and improved studios, we're opening our doors to the public with a brand new venue and cafe space to host and broadcast your favorite artists as well as up-and-coming bands who deserve to be heard. We want you to experience art, theater, live in-studio performances, and more at our brand new venue, and only you can help us get there. We'll even throw in some cool KDHX swag at each donation level. Help 88.1 grow stronger so that we can continue to champion commercial-free independent music, so that this guy can play your music instead of this guy.
Go, 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 Johnny, go, go.
So that's how we get to the left brain through the right brain. Thank you. And we can move pretty quickly through the rest of this. These are some of the stations you might be familiar with around the country in your city or near you. This is a growing base of stations. On the next slide, we talk about the mission statements. These stations are really locally focused. They're hyper-local, they're about the local music scene, and they're about championing local arts and culture. And that's very important to us. Community service, and ultimately using music discovery as our vehicle to get there. The number of these stations has more than doubled. The most recent year we have data on is 2012, but you can see the audience has doubled, the number of stations has doubled. CUM is called cumulative audience, and those are bodies. So it's gone from 2 million to almost 5 million in those 3 years. Okay. As a brief case study, in October I helped relaunch WFUV in New York, which was a long-time station, but we've really moved heavily into new music, become really an indie rock type of radio station. Without any marketing, simply changing the music, WFUV's audience has grown 25% in that time. Our share has increased 52%. They're at an all-time high of around 450,000 listeners in New York. When we started, they were around 250,000. There's other examples around the country, and the other cool thing about this format that we're just learning, and this is kind of new, is that it's a format that has the highest return on listeners for fundraising. So greater than news, talk, classical, anything else. At an early stage, tracking this, these stations are coming in at 7.4 cents for a listener compared, as you can see, to lower numbers as we go down. So as I close, and you can move out of that, I just want to remind you that radio has been here a long time. New media tools are sexy and fancy, but they all work, I believe, better when they're combined. When we combine new media with the power of mainstream media and marketing, we can really move the needle, and I'm happy to be in a room full of people that are interested in impact. Thank you.
And you should, yeah, you should. We could take some questions. I'm going to just interject a thought. We had a great discussion about these opportunities at what was called the non-convention, the convention of non-commercial radio stations that are focused on this music format. And one of the places that we focused on was Radio Milwaukee. You worked on that project as well. Peter Buffett, the chair and co-president, I think, of the Novo Foundation, was one of the founders of that station, is a really ardent advocate for that station. He joined us to talk about his support for that. And one of the things that I'd just like to highlight is every day, five times a week, they feature a really seriously reported short essay, if you will, maybe a 2-minute spot on community service, just to sort of amplify the point on community service. Many of these stations will focus on nonprofits and other community service. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, the Milwaukee is still, to this day, we launched in 2007, my favorite project of all time, because they said, we want to change the weather in Milwaukee. That was actually the phrase I came up with when they told me what they wanted to do, which was they wanted to use music to bridge the culture, educational, social gaps of a very torn city. And that was my response. So you want us to change the weather? And they said, yeah, actually that's it. I'm happy to report 7 years later, they have changed the weather in Milwaukee. It's been an amazing, amazing thing to build a radio station, not to get ratings, not to get listeners, but to make community change. And so out of that, we created these community stories that Vince talks about, and every day, almost every hour, you're going to hear one of these stories in between, you know, the Broken Bells and REM, or whoever it might be. So again, we use the entertainment to deliver the messaging that we feel is so critical. And Radio Milwaukee is probably the leader in the format for community impact. I mean, what they have done in Milwaukee, thanks to Peter Buffett, has been truly phenomenal. And it's great to see other stations now see that and learn that they can follow.
Any questions, any comments, or thoughts about this? Bob, did you? I'm sorry, I thought I heard something over there.
That was like an auctioneer. That was one of those.
Yeah, it was just scratching. Yeah, so David? Question?
So I guess just taking the opportunity, I think we forget, one of my earliest impressions was I listened to radio, I watched TV, and interested in music, etc. And we don't just listen to news, we don't just listen to music. And what I like about the combination, I'm not particularly a AAA listener generally, but I like the combination where you have a range of experiences, both news and culture and community. And I think the local connection, be it in journalism or with music connecting, there's a piece there. I do think journalism is rigorous, is critical in its own way, but as we think about how people are together in communities, I guess that's commentary, and I see it as connected.
It's a good point. So here's a question. Sarah, did you get that? Can we grab that Alzheimer's in the Museum clip from Radio Milwaukee? Yeah. I just wanted to, maybe while we try to be as spontaneous as we can possibly be. So we'll see if we can grab that example of media. But Laura, you run an alternative music station of your own. Beyond the WQXR, you also have Q2.
Right.
And so I just wonder if there's maybe a thought about innovation in that direction of music as well.
So we actually have 3 music streams that are digital only, in addition to QXR, which is our classical music, which is the radio station as well. Q2 is contemporary classical and kind of new music in New York. We have a lot of great partnerships with clubs and other places that are doing contemporary classical music. We do, wonderful kind of festivals around like Steve Reich, or with the artists themselves. So we're very, very connected to the music scene. We have young curators coming in, many of them from Juilliard, who are studying contemporary music, and people have found this all around the country. We also have an opera channel, 24/7, and we have a channel called the Jonathan Channel with Jonathan Schwartz, who is probably the best curator of the American Songbook. And so these are all digital only, and we found ways to support those through pledge drives and donor funding.
That's
as well.
great. Yeah, and I would just encourage anyone to use their devices, tap into all of the properties of WNYC. I know you've developed a special subway app.
Yes.
So I saw it on the subway, the Philadelphia subway.
Oh, really?
Somebody was
Cool.
downloading
Yes.
stuff, so,
Yeah, so this is actually something that we're really excited about. We did a kind of innovation last year. It was last year at this time, and I wanted to kind of really jumpstart. It's part of the Shark thing. Jumpstart some of our strategic initiatives, and so we formed 4 teams, kind of interdisciplinary teams within the organization. One of them and they each had a problem, and they had to create something in 100 days. And so one team decided they were going to take the use case, if you will, that there was a 32-year-old Brooklyn resident named Julie who was commuting to Manhattan every day, had about a 20-minute subway ride, couldn't listen to her radio, but was into kind of podcasts and other things, but wanted kind of the news as well. So they developed a prototype for what is kind of a part of our app now called Discover, where you go in, And it's very simple. You say, I'm interested in news, I'm interested in science, I'm interested in music, I'm interested in technology, whatever it is. Sleep, we actually have sleep as a category. And I have 20 minutes, I have 40 minutes, I have an hour or whatever. And then it downloads for you a playlist. And it's totally up to date. So if it's 5 after 2, you get and you want national news, get the NPR newscast, and if you want local news, you get the local newscast. That's totally up to date. And then it's segments. And you download it, and you can listen on the subway. The thing is that people don't just listen on the subway. They listen when they're exercising, when they're driving in their car, when they just want another kind of discovery. It's kind of more of a discovery platform. And we've now found that a lot of stations around the country want to use this. We've seen that this has increased our stream use and our downloadable use by about 45%.
That's
so
great.
A lot of stations are looking.
And it's
to
a
do
great
this.
way of melding the cross-platform strategies too. So I encourage you all to check that out. I think we'll just acknowledge that I think that the germ of that idea was planted at the D School at Stanford.
That's right, exactly.
if I recall.
Many years ago. Yes.
So you have to,
Exactly.
you have to plan it. Be patient if you're in for the long game.
Yep.
These sort of exercises. We were very fortunate to have a gathering at the D School last summer, and it was very stimulating to have that experience too. So who knows what will come of that in a couple of years. Sarah, I think, has queued up a clip from Radio Milwaukee that is a good example of the community stories that they're airing too.
What is that?
This one's a woven basket.
We're at the Milwaukee Public Museum.
Oh, there's India. Yeah.
Joining a group of elderly people on a private afternoon tour.
Maybe it's the hat.
That's what they said. Tell him to put it on his head.
But everyone here has one thing in common.
For people battling dementia, I think that's important. I think your brain needs to stay stimulated.
This is a program called Spark.
My name is Dawn Casea. I'm the multi-generational education coordinator at the Milwaukee Public Museum.
Spark takes people living with early to mid stages of dementia to different parts of the museum each time, using the exhibits to get their minds working.
Today we visited India Marketplace. How many of these folks had ever been to India? None of them.
It's a multi-sensory experience. During one part of our tour, the guests pass around some fragrant Indian chai tea.
Doesn't that smell good?
Yeah, it smells so good. Incorporating that multi-sensory approach, every time your brain is stimulated, it's working, and it's working at a better pace and more consistent level.
That's so good.
And you can hear it. The atmosphere is fun and light.
Like Christmas.
Like Christmas cookies? It smells like Christmas.
And that's by design.
It's living in the moment. It's not reminiscence. We never ask the questions, do you remember? That just doesn't happen. What we are doing is exposing them to new experiences and giving them new opportunities to learn new things. And that's what makes it so light, I think.
I like the elephant.
You like the elephant? All right, well, the elephant has a great story. So the elephant...
It's very uplifting to know that you've impacted, to see the smiles on their faces when they leave, and to get the thank yous when they're smiling and happy and engaged and just there in the moment and being with us. That's what it's all about.
The Milwaukee Public Museum offers the Spark program twice monthly. You can find the complete schedule at radiomilwaukee.org/stories. I'm Nate Immig for 88.9.
And the thing about that is it's right in the middle of the music, and we always go into a Milwaukee music artist after that. So it's super local. It just fits, and it just keeps moving. We always make them shorter than a song.
It's a great innovation too, and I really encourage all of you to listen to that station and all of the work that we've been talking about. Thank you, Mike, for joining us.
Thank you.
And thanks to our panel. Thanks, Sarah and Dennis, for rolling with the media requests. We try to be spontaneous and not knock them off their chairs over there too much. But you've got about 45 minutes for lunch. Continue the networking. Toss your business cards in the purple box out front, and be back here right at 1 o'clock to get a fast start on a very exciting discussion. Matt will bring us back with more clapping. So thank you.
Maybe you can take these off.
Great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.